So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce someone I've worked with here for many years at PSU, Frank Goovaerts. He's the Director of Career Services in our Massey College of Engineering and Computer Science. He's a former Director of Engineering at Tektronix. He's hired literally hundreds of engineers over the years in his career, so he knows of what he speaks. And he's been invaluable for our students for getting internships, for getting jobs, for career planning. I know these are hard times and maybe a little more challenging than in a few years past in terms of job hunting with what we're hearing about from the high-tech industry. But that made the timing for having Frank come and give us a talk even better. So with that, I'll turn it over. Frank, take it away.
Wow, that's a high bar. Let's just hope that, I mean, I don't expect you'll be looking over and over again at the recording here, but let's hope that we just share a couple nuggets there that you all can use in your career search. So the one thing Tim didn't say is I'm an engineer, so I'm proud of that. Once an engineer, always an engineer. I studied electromechanical engineering. As part of my career, for half the time, I wrote software. Hard to admit, but I did. And then the remaining of that, I was, as Tim said, Director of Engineering at Tektronix. So I've seen, I think, all ends of, the career path, be an entry level, be an engineer looking for a job, being an immigrant, right? I mean, I've been through all that, although some of it is several years back. Anyways, so given I don't necessarily know who all is here, or whether you guys have been working for a while, whether you're still in school, whatever, right? I'm going to suggest, and I'll share my screen with you here. I'm going to suggest an outline for our presentation. Like, we only have an hour. I'm known for talking a lot about this kind of stuff. I can fill up 2 or 3 hours with this topic, right? So I'll have to continue, check my watch, and make sure that we stay on time. The best thing to do is, okay, let me just share my screen here, and that usually works pretty smoothly, but we'll find out, right? I mean, it's Zoom, even after all these years, Zoom sometimes still throws a curveball at us. But there we go. So just a general outline, so it's outlined so whether you have to take that screenshot now so you can just silently disappear, or do we want to stick around till the end because maybe something good is coming, right? So the topic was career planning, right? We'll talk a little bit about job searches because I see a lot of students be confused about that, right? Do we use job boards? Do we network? What's the job market look like, right? So we'll touch on those from the start. Then once you know where to go look, how to at least start the application process, we talk a little bit about transferable skills. And the reason I insert this in here, right, is because there's a limited number of skills that employers are looking for other than your technical skills, right? I mean, if I hire you to do some system validation or something, I'm going to expect you to have these system validation skills, right? And typically your degree as well as a good GPA may, talk for that, right? But it's all these behavioral, transferable skills that I'm really going to poke at, right? So we'll talk about what they are and why it's these and not some others. And then we'll see how that transfers into your resume. We'll come up with a quick, probably 10 minutes, scratch to finish resume building, where I try to talk a little bit about, hey, how can you make sure that your resume passes the automated tracking system, right? Because if you get kicked out right away, then nobody wins, right? And then hopefully we have a little bit of time at the end. We'll talk a little bit about interviews, the balance between behavioral and some more technical type of basis on these interviews. So I encourage you, if you have questions during the presentation, how many of you is there here? A fair amount, right? It doesn't tell me exactly, but I'm sure I can figure it out. Oh, 29. All right. So you probably could unmute and holler it, right? Or you can use the chat, and I'll try to monitor the chat and get to that as we go. All right. So any questions from the get-go? Something, and this is your opportunity to kind of disappear if you say, boy, I don't need this credit. He's not going to tell anything that I don't know already. By all means, leave, right? Any other questions from the get-go here? All right, cool. So let's start with the beginning here. And job searches, right? I mean, I see that as being, you know, something that many students don't know how to do, how to start. Where do I go look, right? And what process do I use? And what are the different steps in applying for jobs? How long should I wait? You know, what if I hear back? What if I don't hear back, right? So we'll touch a little bit on all of that. By all means, and I'll put this in the chat too, right? If I'm here, you know, to help you at PSU, right? So any point in time, you know, can fhg@bbx.edu would be a way to reach me by email, or Goovaerts.youcanbook.me is a good place to go and set up either an in-person or a virtual. The default is virtual, but you can specify in-person appointment with me and we can talk about your questions, right? All right, career planning. So I always start, so we talked a little bit about job boards versus a list of preferred employers, right? And why do I frame it like that? Well, if we look at, and this is going to be a very involved Venn diagram here, right? Or whatever. Consider this all the jobs, not a big zero, right? But consider this all the jobs that are out there that you somehow qualify for, right? So if we look that up, right, we can say, okay, some of these positions are posted today because a company says, hey, we posted on our website, we're looking for this position. And these are positions I refer to as oftentimes posted. You can find them on the web. And by the way, if a company is a publicly traded company at one point in time, they have to publicize the job they're hiring for, right? So sooner or later, you'll find that job there. But there's also a bunch of jobs that we refer to as hidden because they're not posted yet. But that doesn't mean that employer is not looking. Good examples, right? I mean, you've all heard about layoffs at Meta and Google and, you know, Microsoft. Well, this is probably not the time that they're going to advertise a lot of jobs because, you know, they just laid people off, right? But that doesn't mean these companies aren't stupid, right? They know that eventually, right? Yes, we had to lay off a lot of people because we overhired during the pandemic, whatever the reason was, but they all know that eventually, you know, they're going to have to hire more people. They're going to have to hire people that replace because they're fed up with that company, right? Doesn't mean you can't be a good employee there, right? So there's a lot of hidden jobs. And by hidden jobs, we mean the company is really looking. They haven't necessarily advertised the job yet, okay? So what makes this hopefully a little more dramatic is typically the posted job is about 10%, where the hidden jobs are about 90%, right? So if you concentrate on, you know, chasing those posted jobs, right, you're not only letting a lot of stuff on the table, but as you'll see later on, right, you're already at a disadvantage because what companies typically do, and this is probably the crux of this slide here, right? If you have all these different companies in here, company, I won't put names down, right? A, B, C, whatever, right? What they do is they build a talent pool, right? And they build a talent pool based on this hidden job market, right? They send people out to career fairs, even though they're not hired right now. They encourage their employees to go participate in meetups. They organize events. They organize their employees to reach out to others, right? So they're building this secret talent pool, because then by the time, so there is, and I'll give you a hint in a few minutes how to really insert yourself in that talent pool. But then, right, when they say, boy, we're ready to hire now, oh, we have 10 people already here in our talent pool that we think would qualify for this job. And maybe they've been talking to them already, right? So at that point in time, they now post that job on their career site, on the external web, on LinkedIn, on whatever, right? And what happens is for that job, right, now all of a sudden you have sometimes hundreds of people applying to that, right? And if you wait till that minute to say, okay, I'll apply to that job too, you're somewhere in here. And unless your resume really stands out and you have all the qualifications and then some, right, you'll never hear back. I hear it from students over and over. And students say, well, I've been applying to 100 jobs this week and I haven't heard back anything, right? No, because I guarantee you, I mean, some, probably all of you are pretty good, but there's people out there that are better, right? There's people out there that may have a more attractive resume that percolate to the top of this list here, right? So what we're going to talk a little bit about here in light of these job searches, right? If you can participate, right, in these lists of candidates that employers are building, right? Now, instead of just being a number, 1 out of, say, 200, right? You can be one of 4, 5, maybe 10 that gets somewhat of a preferential treatment, because you already maybe have connected to people there. Maybe you've been interviewing already. It happens all the time. I mean, employers can interview for a position before they post it. They can't hire before they post it because they have to, be able to prove that, okay, we got 250 candidates and here are the best ones. But, there's room for some imagination there, right? So my approach to job searches, and we'll talk more about job boards and how you can really use them to your advantage. But in my mind, right, your job search start with an approach that I say be picky. Yes, you heard me. Be selective, right? Be selective. And the way that selective process works is the first step is come up with employers you aspire to work for, right? And I say, 7 to 10 employers maybe. So really a very manageable account, a number of, because there's going to be work involved with this, believe me. And I'll tell you some of the things that you can do, right? But come up with that list of employers, and these employers could be different for everybody, right? Maybe your selection is geographically. You say, boy, I don't want to move out of Portland, or I don't want to move away from the West Side. I'm going to concentrate on here. Maybe you're an international student that says, boy, I really should concentrate on those companies that are more likely to hire international students. Because if you're wasting your time applying to companies that are not going to hire you because you're an international student, right? You're wasting your time, right? So you may as well, your list for each and every one of you, that list of 10 or so employers is going to be different. What you do with them is not, though, okay? So another thing that could come in, right, in you picking employers, do you want to go work for a big company or a little company, right? How do you consider yourself being, more successful? Do you, big versus little, right? Anyways, so the second step in that is, it gets tougher, by the way. So far, so good, right? It's easy to Google company names, even get company names from these job boards, right? That are currently hiring. You may as well, right? The second step is a little tougher. It's identify people of interest, right? And I say people of interest with those employers, right? With employer. The reason I say people of interest, because it sometimes varies a little bit, right? For most engineering students, right? Whether you're graduate, undergraduate, a person of interest is somebody you can carry on a conversation with on a technical level. You can go pick their brain. You can say, hey, I see you're a system validation engineer and you work at Siemens. Tell me, what's the day in your life look like? You know, do you work with customers? Do you work with other engineers, right? What kind of tools do you use? So it's really, I have a time say you want to eventually pick their brain, right? And that's the third step is once you identify these people, and I'll help you a little bit on how to do that. Once you identify these people, what do you do with them, right? And technically speaking, right, it's an informational interview. So I call it informational interview, but it's really picking somebody's brain, right? I mean, you need to do a little preparation here because once you've managed to get some time of somebody, you don't want to just sit there and stare at them, right? You want to make it worth your time as well as their time, right? And it's reciprocal, right? Because you're going to learn something about that company. You're going to learn something about working there. You're going to learn something about what makes people successful at that company, whatever things you want to talk about, right? But think about the other way around, right? This is your opportunity to shine. This is your opportunity to make a good impression. This is your opportunity to get into their pipeline, right? It's one way to do it. I'm not saying it's the only way, right? But it's one way for you to really make a great impression and for that person to kind of remember you, right? Oh, yeah, can you send me your resume? Right. I gotta keep tabs on you, right? It happens all the time. Well, I shouldn't say it happens all the time. It happens a lot, right? So yes, you may have to talk to a lot of people, a lot of different companies for actually you being inserted in some of these, talent pools. But if you don't do it, and if you rely just on the posted jobs, you're going to be looking for a job for a long time, really. Okay. And this is something, this informational interview, right? This picking somebody's brain is something you can continue even if you're working somewhere, right? You should never, at least in today's day and age, check out and say, boy, I'm working here, I'm going to work here forever and everything will be fine, because it's not going to work, right? Layoffs happen all the time. So you got to be prepared to have a network of people at all times. Whether you're a student, preferably you start soon, but this is a lifetime thing, right? You continue to expand your network. And what the key is in this network, it's not just connecting to somebody, say, on LinkedIn, because obviously, LinkedIn would be a good tool. And when we get around to it, I'll give you a couple tricks on using LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn could be a good tool for you to figure out, who to connect to. And it has the platform set to do so, right? But it's not, and I want to emphasize this, right? Because I see this all too often that, oh, I send invites to 100 people and 15 connected to me. Great. Well, you're still just a digital connection, right? So I really think this process of career planning, of looking for jobs, is not complete until you've had some kind of in-person contact, right? And maybe I'm old-fashioned. I'm old, right? But I haven't seen somebody, haven't hear somebody talk, possibly shake hands, although it could be virtual, that's fine too, right? Just makes all the difference. The half-life of that connection is 10 times better than if you just had an email from somebody, or, oh yeah, I connected to that person on LinkedIn, but they don't know you, right? And eventually what you're going to do, right, after these informational interviews, now, if say you see a job or you apply to a job, even to a posted job with that company, right? You can now use the backdoor and you can say, hey, remember we talked 2 weeks, 6 months, 3 months ago, and I would really appreciate it if you could forward my resume to the hiring manager or introduce me to the hiring manager, right? And if they really have fond recollections of talking to you, right, and they really thought at the time like, wow, it'd be great to work with this person, they'll jump on that. Because here's the secret, right? A lot of companies actually pay out high-run bonuses, right? When I was working at Tektronix, right, if I had one of my employees walk up to me, say, hey, here's the resume of somebody, they're really, really, really good, right? We end up hiring that person. The person who referred this person would get a high-run bonus, $500,000, $5,000. It depends kind of what the level was, right? But there is an incentive for employees to do this for their employer. So you should not feel bad about reaching out to somebody because they may benefit from it. We all will benefit from it, because if I have a choice between a candidate, obviously you still have to prove you can do the job, right? But if I have the choice between a candidate with an internal referral versus somebody I just pick out of a stack of 200, right? I'll go for the internal referral any day, right? Because I know someone of my employees put out their foot and said, I think this would be a good hire, right? So keep that in mind. That's why this process works, okay? So a couple more words on the job board part of this, right? Because job boards are here, they're here to stay. And you can, believe it or not, but you can benefit from them, right? But you got to know a few tricks in order not to get overwhelmed by it. Because the problem is, right, you start applying to all those job boards, because yes, maybe you started Indeed, but then it says, hey, you can apply via ZipRecruiter or Jobs.io or whatever, right? You have all these job boards that try to get part of the pie, right? And the more indirection you have, right, the more chances that your resume somewhere will get kicked out, once, and two, the more chances for spam, right? I mean, if a lot of people or a lot of bots, right, touch your resume before it gets to the employer, you're going to get some email from all of them, right? Or some kind of spam or whatever, right? So the way I'd like to kind of strategize there, right? So yeah, maybe I look at job boards, and the electrical computer engineers will understand what this is, but I rank them by noise, right? So noise, where can you see the signal over the noise, right? So by noise, I really mean jobs that are posted on job boards, but they're no longer valid. They've been posted maybe a year ago, and somehow, and I don't know the mechanics behind this, but somehow you can still find that job, right? So my process, if I use a job board like Indeed, for instance, right, and there is some more meaningful ones, but let's just start with the one at the bottom, right? If I start with Indeed, there's a lot of stuff on there that is no longer valid. So what I always do when I find a job, really on any job board, maybe with the exception of LinkedIn, on any job board, is I go to the company website, to the company career site, and I see if I can identify that particular job. If it's no longer there, they're probably no longer looking, right? So I'd say forget about it, right? Don't waste your time to apply for that job, because it's probably expired. Now, if that particular company doesn't have a career site, maybe they use Indeed for all their hiring, right? So that's a little different now. If you can't find a career site on the employer webpage, maybe go for Indeed, because that may be the only way they're looking, right? So you need to do a little bit of engineering there, a little bit of problem solving, and see what you're going to do. All right. So if we go up the chain from this, I think LinkedIn in general is a pretty good job board. because in general, right, you have a person attached to it that still works for that company, right? So at least there is a trail to somebody that potentially you can reach out to, right? Plus, the nice thing about it is if you end up writing a cover letter, right, you can or some kind of communication, you can address it to somebody, right? So that's a plus, right? Handshake. So Handshake is the PSU job board. So you all, if you're still a student or you have been a student, then you have a Handshake account. If while you were a student, you never used your Handshake account and now you don't have a pdx.edu anymore, it's a little tougher to get back into Handshake, but it can be done. So Handshake is relatively good because employers need to make an effort to post a job to PSU, right? Now, oftentimes employers, kind of abuse that fact a little bit and they say, oh, I can post a job to all universities, part of Handshake. So let's do that, right? So there may be that position of an employer in Florida that's really doesn't have any intention to hire somebody from PSU. So there is that possibility there. But in general, the noise is pretty good. And then there is the MCEX listserv. So I should put a link in the chat as well. So it's a listserv we, me, maintain for the College of Engineering, right? And it's a little special, or maybe a lot special, as to where I don't post every job. I don't post jobs that say, I don't post jobs you can find online, because it doesn't make sense for me to kind of Google jobs and say, oh, here's a good one, let me post that, right? So I typically only post those jobs where a representative from that company reaches out to me or the department and say, hey, Frank, or hey, Martin, or hey, Rick, whoever it is, or Tim, we really want to look at a PSU student, right? Can you post this for us? And that's what the jobs are that I post, right? And you'll see there's categories there for CS, ME, ECE, mechanical engineering and ETM. And I try to make a conscious decision as to which of these threads I post it to, right? So you won't find a lot of stuff there, but if you do, they're looking for a PSU graduate, okay? So that's good. Let's see. So let's talk before we go into, well, actually, I'm going to do it now. I think I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to show you how to use LinkedIn, because I think it's the best kept secret, he says, in LinkedIn. So what LinkedIn did maybe 6-7 years ago or something like that, they created what they call the college portal, and nobody knows about it, right? And why is it important for you? So let me back up. If you're on LinkedIn and you're reaching out to people, you can think, yeah, what's the chances that somebody's going to accept my invite, let alone have a conversation with you after that, right? I mean, that's a lot to ask for. So, and I agree with you. If you reach out to a complete stranger, that's probably what happens. So in order to increase that chance, right, you need to reach out to people you have something in common with. And really, the last thing our students think of is PSU. Right? And especially PSU as connected to LinkedIn, right? So bear with me for a second. If you go to the search bar and you type in Portland State University, you follow the one that says company higher education, and then you say, yeah, that's what I want. So this is the university portal. You may say, okay, that looks like the Portland skyline, but what is going to buy me, right? you have to do one more thing that is maybe counterintuitive, right? You have to click on the alumni page, okay? Alumni, it sometimes has a negative connotation, right? So and in LinkedIn, what it means is that person went to college at PSU and they have a LinkedIn account, right? So, and lo and behold, if you look at that, there's almost 137,000 of them there. Like, so there's a lot of people on LinkedIn. Now, I know, Professor Anderson keeps, an ETM group, and that's a wonderful place too, because now you're even more focused, right? You can directly reach out to students who have gone through the ETM program, and that obviously will give you even a greater, return on your investment, right? Because the people who already know what you can do, right? As to we're here, we're just more looking for general, general population in those companies, right? So I don't want to ask what company to put in. I'll just put something in that I think may make sense, right? Because if I ask the question, people say Intel. How about Intel? And Intel is great, but there's like 2,000 of our alumni that are there, right? So I'd say, okay, let's do. No, we'll go on a limb. We'll say Google, right? I mean, that's kind of cool. So, and there really isn't all that many of our graduates who work at Google, but still 127, right? So the way I use this tool, so remember, we talked about those 10 or so employers that are your favorite employers for your career path, right? Whether you're still in school, whether you graduated, you still should have that list, right? Well, type in those names of those companies and see who works there. And what we can do, so if I click on Google, right, I won't go a lot into it because I'm just eating away my time, but that's okay. I think this is really, if one of the takeaways of this presentation, it's the university portal, I think, right? So anyways, what you can see here, you can see, oh, there is Gino, there is Nina, there's Satish, Benjamin, right? So you can go click on any of them, right? I clicked on Benjamin. I don't know Benjamin directly, right? We're not connected. But if I go look at Benjamin's profile, right, and I scroll all the way down, right, I see that he got a bachelor's in computer science. What do I learn from that already? Okay, well, Google is not all about master's degree, right? Just a tidbit. I'm sure many others will have masters and PhDs, but in case of Benjamin, he didn't, right? And he's computer science, okay, which you kind of expect for Google. Anyways, you can also see, right, if you now start looking at Benjamin's profile, and I hit kind of sort of a jackpot here, because at least Benjamin, right, not only has 220 connections. So another little thing to think about, right? If you see 5 or 6 in that box, don't bother because they're not using it. They had to create their account for a class or something like that, but they're not using it, right? Anyways, 220, that's okay. But if you look, right, he was an intern at NWA, then for Tripwire, then he was a front web developer for Trade School Inc. I'm not sure what they are, but anyways, he worked there for about a year, right? Then he worked for Microsoft as an application developer. And now for the last 4 years, he's at Google. He even tells us what he's doing, right? He tells us a little bit about what he's passionate about, right? So all these things together, if you say, wow, I think that's really cool, and I could benefit from talking to Benjamin. I know Benjamin doesn't look like a hiring manager, right? But that doesn't matter because he has a manager at Google that he probably meets with weekly, monthly. I don't know what they do at Google, but he has some access to his manager, right? So you can say, connect, please add a note, because this is what's going to give away that you and Benjamin have PSU in common, right? Say, hey, I noticed you graduated from PSU. I'm currently whatever you're doing, right? And you say, I would love to join your network, right? So it's LinkedIn, so it's a two-step process, right? You got to request them to join your network first. And then as soon as LinkedIn notifies you, hey, Benjamin has accepted your invite, you can then message him and say, hey, thank you for doing so. I really love to pick your brain about working at Google, for instance, right? So don't ask for a job because Benjamin is not going to hire you, right? Probably. I mean, he may, but I'm just saying. So don't ask for a job. Don't ask him to send your resume along because Benjamin doesn't know you yet, right? So request a 15-minute Zoom interview, whatever, right? Say, hey, I'd love to chat. What's a good time for you, right? And especially when this is one of the side effects, maybe benefits of having gone through a pandemic, right? Meeting over, Google Meets, Zoom, Teams, whatever it is, has become second nature, right? It's like, oh, sure. And then if somehow you hit it off well and Benjamin says, hey, you want to come over? I'll show you around, right? Great. Or if you want a coffee afterwards or pay him lunch, whatever, right? But the Zoom, the making it digital, right? Making it virtual takes all those other questions off the table, right? You don't have to think about a place you're going to meet. You don't have to think about, well, do I buy him coffee or not? Those are all nice things, but they just sometimes get in the way, right? So anyways, that's my little secret on using LinkedIn as a networking tool. Right now, you can be active on LinkedIn. That's great. You can join LinkedIn groups. There's other ways you can connect to people, but this is just an easy way, to meet people that you have a lot in common with. All right, so let's go back to where we were. And then we go into the next section, which talked a little bit about these skills. I think if I look at my outline again, I mentioned transferable skills, right? You don't see that yet. There you go. Okay, so why is it so important? And I always harp on it because transferable skills, because when people hire people, when employers hire future employees, right? Yes, your technical skills matter. The fact that you have an ETM degree matters. The fact that you have an ECE degree matters. The fact that you have a software degree matters, right? But, if you're capable of getting a 4 or 5 year degree or 6-year degree, right? You're capable of picking up any tool that I will throw at you, right? If you say, hey, yes, I know you're proficient at C, C++, C#, but I need you to do Haskell, right? Chances are you can figure this out, right? What doesn't change, though, is the way you behave, right? And I'm not saying, all of you are different, right? All of you have different examples of these behavioral skills, and we'll talk about them in a second here. All of you have different transferable skills. All of you are different people. Employers are looking for a variety of people, right? Yes, I may look for somebody who's really wants to do leadership, but then again, I may look for somebody who just loves to be part of a team and never be in the spotlight, right? I may look for somebody who's really creative because that's the position I'm hiring for. But I also may be looking for somebody who just plays it by the book, right? So therefore, I'm going to put these skills down. You don't have to be, there's no right and wrong behavior for each of those. Well, maybe in some cases there's a wrong behavior, but most of the time there's no right or wrong way, right? So the skills, and the reason I talk about them, right, is because these skills will transfer to your resume. These skills will transfer to your interview skills. So let's say what they are and why. Communication, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. So communication, why is communication so important? And I know many of you know this, and if not, this is a good time to learn, right? You'll be talking to others, right? Once you work, and you'll be writing documents, you'll be reading documents, you'll be listening to others, you'll be explaining things to others, right? So communication, whether it's written, whether it's verbal, is essential, right? In most cases. Right? Now, if I'm looking for this, I don't want this to sound negative, but I'm looking for this really smart person. And for all I matters, right, I can lock them up somewhere as long as they come out with the right answers, right? And they don't have to interact with anybody. I may be looking for a person like that, right? So you may be applying to a position where communication isn't all that important. That's true too. But for 90% of the jobs out there, 95%, communication is one of the key things, right? So you can interact with others on your team, okay? So team, all right, teamwork. Teamwork is important, just in case you didn't know it yet. Because in most cases, right, products, stuff is developed by teams. It's not just a one-man show, right? I mean, it may be in a startup somewhere, right? But typically you'll be working in teams. So any evidence on your resume in interview skills, if I ask you a question, well, tell me about a time that you was in a team environment and one of your teammates, you know, didn't get something that you were talking about. How did you approach that, right? So I'm asking you these lead-in questions for you to give me examples of your teamwork, right? Team projects in school, right? Put them on your resume, right? We'll go later into what goes in a resume, what doesn't go in a resume, but these transferable skills, it's important to at least touch on some of them on your resume, right? So when people look through it, they say, oh, here's an evidence of teamwork. That's great, because that's what we use. Oh, here's evidence of presentation skills. That's great, because we use those, right? And these are mostly transferable skills really for engineering, and, you know, I bundle them, obviously, computer science, right? STEM positions, right? But not only, even if you're a business student, these are probably important skills to have, right? Problem solving, because chances are that's what you're being hired for, right? Because I have some problems, maybe not all of them really hard, but I have problems that needs to be solved, right? Maybe some of them are routine, they're nevertheless problems, right? That I'm looking to, what's your approach to problem solving, right? So I may ask you a question, right? And maybe this is something that wouldn't necessarily go on a resume, but I'm asking you a question, right? What if you get stuck, right? You're faced with something and you don't know how to do it. Where do you go, right? Because I want to kind of see inside your brain, inside the way you, when this happens in a job setting, how are you going to react, right? Are you going to just check out and say, boy, I can't do this, give me something else? Or, I mean, that would be the wrong answer, obviously, right? Or what kind of approach? I mean, there's lots of ways you can go. You go ask somebody, you can Google something, you can do a trial and error. I mean, there's a lot of good answers to questions about problem solving, right? Planning. The reason planning is important for engineers is because people are not going to babysit you, right? Once you have a job, it's like, okay, here, do this. And it doesn't mean you're completely on your own, but you're kind of sort of on your own to come up with a plan, right? Like, okay, I'll do this first, then I'll do that. At least a straw man to this, right? And you may deviate from it, you may do different things, but it's good to kind of come up with some things and a timeline, right? Say, I think I can do this the first week, and then maybe do that the second week, and then hold yourself, you know, accountable for what it is you laid out and adjust, right? So planning is important. Creativity. Why is creativity important, right? I mean, if you continue to do things the way you did them in the past, you'll continue to get the same results. And That may just perfectly well for the business you're in. But in most cases, right, if you can come in, bring some new ideas, say, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? Oh, no, we haven't. Oh, look, we now got a different result, right? So creativity, innovation is always a good skill to bring to a job, right? So if you can have some evidence on your resume, right, of having solved problems creatively, of having maybe found opportunities creatively, let's see how we can write about that, right? And then last but not least, adaptability, right? So if an employer hires somebody, and for those who are already working, they may be able to talk to that, but I hire you for a specific job, but if you stick with the company for longer than, say, 3 months, right, chances are you're going to be doing something else. Because as you look at general, a lot of you will be working on development life cycles, right? So you go to brainstorming part, maybe architecture, maybe implementation, maybe testing, right? So I may ask you, although I hired you as, say, a developer or a data analyst, whatever, I may ask you at one point in time, boy, we really need additional, power here in our testing team. Can you work with them for a while or something like that, right? And adaptability is something that really is, I think, built into your resume. And we'll talk a little bit of that in a few minutes. But adaptability, if I see, right, a resume and it says, hey, I got my engineering degree and I had a 4.0 and I took some of the classes and here's some description of those classes, and that's all I see, right? Then that person doesn't, right from the get-go, right, on the resume, doesn't look very adaptable to me. Now, you still may be, and hopefully an interview will bring that out, right? But if I have your resume and then somebody else's who had maybe the same degree, maybe a GPA that's just a little bit less, but they say, hey, I was involved in, this student team, and I did an internship here, and I did a personal project here, that person now comes across as being more versatile, more adaptable, right? And I may pick that person over the other even before I end up talking to them, right? So the thing I'm trying to say here, right, and with that is, and again, we'll touch a little bit on that when we talk about resumes, is think about this now while you're in school, right? How can you, not be that necessarily one-track mind, but maybe do a personal project or go above and beyond an assignment that was given to you and say, boy, I did this, but look, I went above and beyond this, because it may be ways that you can differentiate yourself on your resume. And a resume is something, that could be pretty critical, because if you're not doing any networking, right, or you have no connections to the industry, then a resume is all you got to speak for you, right? So just make sure, if you opt not to do the other ways of finding a job, make sure your resume is really good, make sure you meet most of the qualifications and you stand out, right? That's easier said than done, but as long as you're in school, you can do some effort to get there, right? So let's talk a little bit about resumes, right? And many of these things, before I go there, right? So in preparation of your resume, and I imagine most of you have one already, right? But in preparation of a resume and in preparation of job interviews, right? I want you to think about writing, yeah, you heard it, writing stories about each of those. And the reason I say write them, right? You want to have, because they grow, right? And they expand. And you may look at, okay, communication skills. Oh yeah, I did this and I did this, right? But then, you go look at some more sample behavioral interview questions and somebody says, hey, doing a presentation or writing a report can count as a communication skill. Oh yeah, I did that too, right? So you want to, the writing the stories is really preparatory work for both your resume, right? As well as preparation for interviews, because people during an interview will ask you questions on most of those, right? They'll say, hey, here, right? Tell me about a time you did some thorough planning, but that part you were waiting for to assemble your piece didn't come in on time. What did you do, right? So is that just planning? Maybe that's planning and creativity. Maybe it's planning and problem solving. So you may combine some of these transferable skills in a story, right? But that would make a good story, right? Say, boy, yeah, we had our capstone team, or we had our this and that, and everybody came together, and the one person disk drive crashed and didn't have it back up to the cloud, whatever it is, right? I mean, you have these stories ready. So when you go into an interview, right, you have something in the back of your mind. Also, these give you stuff to put on your resume. So we'll talk a little bit about a resume, and I know this may maybe not be applicable to all of you. If you're currently working and your resume is pretty good, maybe you don't need this, but anyways, I want to talk, and I'm going to give in 10 minutes or so, right, a quick overview of the different sections in a resume, as well as the order of these sections in the resume, and how long your resume should be, right? So you'll hear often one page, right? Well, where the one page come from, and oftentimes for somebody who just graduated, maybe they had one job before or something like that, you really should be able to concisely reflect it in one page, right? Now, if you're one of these students that have been involved in a lot of things and you say, boy, all these things are relevant, there's no rule that says you can't have 2 pages, right? But the one page comes from the fact that your resume, the first time somebody looks at it, right, a person, not talking about an automated tracking system because they can't care less how long it is, right? But an automated tracking system, an in-person will give you a resume about 10 to 15 seconds. Right? If there's a lot of words, if there's paragraphs in there, if there is endless descriptions in there, I'm sorry, I'm not going to read it. If I don't read it, I cannot learn about you, right? If it looks too overwhelming to read, I'm going to go to the next one in the list of 150, right? So it's not like I have a lack of resumes to look at. So it's really in your best interest to keep it concise, okay? So what does that mean? It means, so you start with obviously your branding, right? So your name. I suggest a phone number because, people may call you. I've heard people being texted say, hey, we're interested in you, reach back out to us, right? That way, it was a few years back. The job market didn't really talk a lot about that yet, but we will hopefully in a few minutes, has maybe kind of mellowed out a little bit for certain disciplines, right? So we want the phone number there, as well as an email, right? And make sure PDX email is fine as long as you're a student, but once you're done being a student, it's really a year after that. That seems like a long time, but resumes hang around for a long time. So get some kind of professional looking Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, Hotmail. I don't care, whatever you want to do, right? So that's where we start. And then the sections, right, that we look for in this order, really, unless you've been working for, say, and I'm throwing a number here, 2 years, right? Once you have 2 years of experience, maybe your education doesn't need to be at the top anymore, because now your actually work experience may become more important than the fact that you have a degree in ETM, or you have a degree in ECE, or you have a master's degree here and there, right? Because your experience now probably weighs more, right? So 2 years, maybe it's 3 years, for sure 5 years down the line, your education is at the bottom, right? So, but if you're in school or you're a recent grad, education goes first. We'll fill it in just a second. But your mindset to a recruiter, right? I'm looking at your resume. What do I want to know first? I want to know first, what's your major, right? Great, ETM, mechanical engineering, wonderful. Then I want to get a quick look at your technical skills, right? And these may be things like, MATLAB. Maybe it's Microsoft Office. Maybe it's AutoCAD. Maybe it's Tableau. Whatever skills that are required for the jobs that you're applying for, right? And I just say list them, comma separated. I don't really care to know if you think you're an expert, because I may not think so. Or maybe you think you're a novice. I may think, well, that's pretty good, right? So don't identify your skill level. Have the interviewer figure that out, right? Have them ask you questions. Or, you can also use your resume to later on say, if one of those things, say, is Tableau, right? If later on under the experience section, you say, hey, I have 2 years experience of working Tableau. Now I say, wow, that's great, right? But saying that you're an expert, that doesn't mean anything, right? If you want to, and I've seen this, and I thought this was original, and I like it, right? If you want to, but it gets kind of long-winded, right? If for each of these skills you want to say, 2 years or 6 months of experience, so I'm going to specify the time period, right? You've been involved with that tool. Maybe that gives me some kind of, warm and fuzzy feeling that, yeah, this is not just academic, right? So that's good. So education first, technical skills second, and then we go into a section called experience. So before I go there, because I filled out the technical skills, I should have filled out the education as well, right? Just a couple things that need to go in there. And I know we'll still have some time for questions. Just not a lot. So education, so it could be master's, I'll say ETM because chances some of you are, right? At PSU, I like dates. So resumes for engineers are chronological, not functional, right? I want to see things flowing in time, right? So give me the time that you started. And then if you're still here, you can say present or current or whatever. Add an expected graduation date, because that may be important. If I'm looking to hire you, say, oh, you'll be graduating for another 2 years, or you'll be graduating 3 months from now. So that's important for me to know, right? And then also my rule of thumb is put a GPA on. If you're undergraduate, 3.0 or better is good. If you're a graduate student, we'd like to see 3.5 or better, right? So if you're in that category, I would put it on. Because if it's not, right, an automated tracking system may throw you out, say, oh, didn't find a GPA. Somebody may look at your resume, not see a GPA, say, I'm not sure about that. Let's go to number 146, right? Because I have plenty, right? So GPAs are important, right? Not necessarily important process in you getting hired, but maybe an important step in you being, raised to the level of, hey, I want to talk to that person, right? So education, technical skills, experience. So oftentimes, and again, here's where it depends from student to student, right? Sometimes I can see a section on project experience and maybe work experience, right? Sometimes 2 sections is fine. If they kind of meld together, right? Sometimes one section just called experience, and that will stick for here. one section called experience, where you have these different, what I refer to as blocks of experience, right? And these blocks of experience could be volunteer work. They could be meaningful class project, right? So if something looks and feels like it's homework, don't put it in, right? But if it's a 3-month project and you're working with an external sponsor, by all means, put it in, right? It could be prior work. Maybe before you came here, you worked as an undergraduate somewhere, that goes in there, right? So we have these different blocks of experience that, and I won't go in a lot of detail of them. I'll put a link. Yeah, don't forget that screenshot, Tim says. I'll put the link in. Actually, I'll do that now. Bit.ly MCAX career stuff. So that's a link to a Google Drive, and you can find my presentations on job searches, presentations on resumes, presentations on interviewing, because we won't obviously get to that in depth today. So you can find those there and kind of refresh, right? The one thing I want to talk about, so the general format of this block, right, would be your job title, right, the employer, the dates, important, right? Whether you work somebody for a month or whether you work there for 10 years, it's important, right? So the job title, then maybe a short description of what the scope is of your job, or if it's a project, what the scope was of your project, right? Just maybe a couple lines, right? Maybe something you're passionate about in your job, just a little tidbit of information, right? And then we typically go, I didn't talk at all about bullets, but bullets read quicker and faster. They're not as pretty, but they read quicker and faster as opposed to a paragraph, right? People don't read paragraphs anymore, I'm sorry. But you go in a bulleted list, and these are, and this is essential too, and I want to just spend a couple more seconds talking about that. They're called two-part sentences. And while I don't have a lot of examples here, I'll give you one, right? So two-part sentences, they start with an action, right? And the actions actually relate to these transferable skills, right? So an action followed by a result. Right? So an example, and this example is actually, I use this a lot because I kind of like it, right? Was an internship for somebody, right? And they say, hey, the action was I documented I documented the various steps in the manufacturing process, right? That's great. Communication skills, you put on your resume, start with this action verb, I documented something. But from a reader's point of view, right? You say that, but what was the impact of what you did, right? What was the result you achieved? So if you complete that sentence, if you make that one-part sentence, I documented 10 steps in the manufacturing process, to allowing technicians to come up to speed in half the time, you may have to have some evidence to back that up, right? But if you can say, I did this, and look, they're still using it today, and this is what they're using it for, now all of a sudden, right, your resume gets elevated, right? Because you come across as a person who gets things done, right? So think it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do, but the same thing goes with a little project of 5 teams, of 5 people in my team. That's great, but how good were you at doing it, right? So if you say led that project, resulting in on-time delivery or whatever it is, right? Wow, now I have some reasons to call you up and ask questions about that, right? So two-part sentences is key to writing good resumes that people will be, waiting to keep in touch with you and ask you questions about, right? I'm not going to get to interviews, obviously, but interviews, again, are driven by these skills. People will ask you behavioral questions. Tell me about a time. That's why it's so important to write these stories, so you have something in the back of your mind to talk about, right? And 99% of the questions can fit in one of these categories, right? So you're not wasting your time by writing stories that cover these particular skills. So, whew, I can keep talking about this, but I won't. We'll see if there's some questions, and then we answer some questions. And I know I haven't gotten specifically to the job market, so I can talk a little bit about that if some of you have concerns about that. But let's just open it up for a few questions. This is your time also to take a screenshot if you haven't done so and want to take credit for it.
Wow, no questions from anyone. This is impressive.
So did he get bonus points? What if they ask a question, they don't have to send in the report? No, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well, the asking a question and unmuting themselves often will bring their video and picture right up to the top, making it even easier to do a screen capture.
Ah.
So, Sam, do you have a question or comment?
Or are you just taking a picture?
Professor, I am taking a picture.
That's good.
So, I mean, what is there another career fair coming up soon?
So yes and no. There is one coming up on May 4th. It's Tuesday, I believe. And but it's a general career fair, right? So it's not an engineering and technology career fair. It's May 2nd. It's a Tuesday. So what I still advise you, right, and I'll send out an email to my listserv. What I still advise students is to go look and see who's there, like I do with all career fairs, right? I mean, if you go to the career fair with no preparation, you're not going to get anything out of it, right? So you want to go look, see who's there, right? Do you have a story to share with them? Do you think you'd make a great employee for them? Do you and them have something in common with them, right? So identify them, maybe go see on Handshake if they have any positions posted or on their website, right? And it could be your quick interview. It could be say, hey, I found this position on your website. You know, I think I'm a good candidate and here is why, right? Give them your spiel. Again, most companies will not be in the tech sector, but hey, if there's 50 companies there, maybe 3 or 4 are, maybe you can be the difference. You can be the person that stands out, that they'll remember. So by all means, May 2nd, 11 to 3. And you can find, other than my listserv, which again, I'll send you an email if you subscribe to it. Handshake is really your ticket to the career fair.
And I liked your mention of the LinkedIn. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not the don't use it as your only thing, but it's a good resource. And in ETM, as you're approaching graduation, please make sure to send a request to join the ETM alumni group. We have over 50% of all the alumni in the history of the department since its founding in 1987 are a member of that LinkedIn alumni group. It's a great resource. And again, use all the same caveats that Frank had. Don't use it to just say, please hire me. That won't come across well. But on the other hand, use it for intelligence gathering. Be smart, be judicious, and whether it's graduating with a master's, a PhD, or even in the quarter you're graduating with a graduate certificate, you're eligible to join our alumni group. And go ahead, send a connection request for that, either through LinkedIn or to me, and we can get you added.
Yeah, it's a great way to see where our ETM graduates are working at as well.
Oh, yeah. And Frank, I don't know if you've ever seen the slideshow that we run during ETM's graduation ceremony event. We run a slideshow of all of their names and pictures and where they're currently working. Run it as a slideshow in the background.
Yeah. And that's just so great because as we all know, and I know I can say this in front of Tim as well, not everybody knows what our ETM students are capable of, right? So you can either go sell yourself to a company that is unaware of that, and by all means do so, right? But you can go to a company who already knows the benefits, right? And see if there's something there. So yeah.
So I received a direct message email to me, but I think he meant it for you, Frank. And the question was, what's your opinion on sending out cold emails to recruiters?
I got it too.
Okay.
So I'm not a big fan of recruiters, right? I mean, sure, do it. It's the same as, just connecting to a recruiter on LinkedIn or connecting to somebody on LinkedIn, right? All they got is really your digital information, right? And is it going to hurt you? It's not. So by all means, if you're compelled to do so, right? But don't expect anything from it. Unless, your resume is so good and you have so many unique qualifications that you stand out and somebody looks and says, wow, right? But if you're like most, it's probably not going to make a big difference. But it's not going to hurt.
Yeah. Any last questions? Otherwise, we can let people get started on their weekend, and probably homework for the weekend for all of our classes. I know everybody's got a lot to do, so going once, going twice. Okay, well, thank you again, Frank, for giving us a seminar on this. And it's always helpful to kind of get recalibrated as well as to what the current trends and how they're looking at things.
Okay.
So
Glad to be here. And it's still, for those who are in the dungeon somewhere, it's still sunny outside. So go and enjoy it because it's going to change soon. All right. Take care.
okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Thanks. Bye.